Sections of this video are sponsored. It's the last day of 2025, and you know what that means. It's time for my Game of the Year list for 2024, of course. While I usually just have my honourable mentions in the main list, this time I've decided to split it up a little bit more. There's going to be sections for disqualified games, re-releases, DLC, and early access games. I've also split up my honourable mentions into mentions and honourable mentions. I had plans for this to be even bigger originally, not just the games I finished, but every single game I played from the year, but that was over 130 games, and that was just a bit too much. I've trimmed it down to a nice round 48 games, which is still just a dumb number of games if I'm being honest, but if I don't do this right now, it will be even more. There's another 7 games from 2024 that I've just bought and I haven't even started yet. Games of the Year lists are dumb. Re-releases. Castlevania Dominus Collection. Special thanks to Konami for providing the key to this game. I do love this package, but it's also just a re-release of games that are almost 20 years old at this point, so there's no way it could be anywhere else. Dawn of Sorrow was actually the first game in the series I ever played, and while I've later come to appreciate the earlier games more, these ones are definitely a fun set. For the most part, they're great ports, though I definitely had more crashes in my time with this than any of the originals on the DS. Not a huge fan of the Haunted Castle either, but it's still a cool inclusion. This is probably the second best collection of Castlevania games, though that's not a huge bar to climb to be honest. I assume the Advanced Collection is better purely because I like those games more, but I haven't actually played that. Regardless, this is well worth picking up, it just couldn't be part of the main list. Downloadable content. Power Wash Simulator Cruise Ship Sundeck Summer 2024. This may as well just have been the Power Wash Simulator section, honestly. For the most part I enjoy the game, though those last few bits are always a nightmare to get. These DLC packs are usually pretty good and mostly free, but they're also just more of the same. I'm not sure why they're DLCs, honestly, rather than just a normal update. The cruise ship is fine, I guess. Power Wash Simulator Ice Rink Winter 2024. It almost feels like they made a deal which required them to release a certain amount of DLC packs to get the game published, so rather than just add the levels normally, they released them as individual packs instead. The Ice Rink is one of my favourites, mostly just because of the penguins and polar bears. Power Wash Simulator Muckingham Files Part 3. These big vehicle levels are always frustrating, because it's just awkward getting around all of them, and especially when the dirt is on the underside of objects near the stairs which you have to climb. On the other hand, I do love aquariums, so this pack is pretty 50-50. I think if there were more fish, I'd like it more. Power Wash Simulator Muckingham Files Part 4. Writing these, I'm kind of unsure how much I actually like Power Wash Simulator. I just keep saying things are frustrating, and that's honestly the predominant memory I have for the entire game. It's definitely compelling, I like getting things clean, but I don't think there's a single level where I didn't get annoyed at some point. Washing the plane was kind of cool, but if it was up to me, I'd rather just spray copious amounts of water in the face of the Crypto Bro rather than wash his house. Power Wash Simulator Halloween Seasonal 2024. It's been pretty hard writing these sections so far because it's literally just single levels in the same game and they're basically all the same. I've listed them in the order I finished them, but this is actually one of my least favourite levels, despite how much I like Halloween. The purple lighting is just really annoying and makes it a lot harder to see the dirt, which makes those already frustrating last few missed spots even harder to find. Tavern Talk Tempest Tantrum. Now if you go back and check, I actually gave this a lower score than I gave some of the Power Wash DLC I've already listed, so you may be wondering why it's higher. Primarily it's just because this is at least a full story, even if it's short and kind of bland, where those are just single levels. I don't think I'll ever go back to either game, that's just not the kind of person I am, but if I did, I'd definitely pick this over any Power Wash Simulator level. Outside of that comparison, it's not great. It's incredibly short for the price, there's barely any reason to go through it more than once, and its writing isn't any more interesting than the base game. I don't regret playing it, but I don't feel like my life is any better for the experience. Final Fantasy XIV Dawn Trail. If I hadn't changed my rules this year, this would probably be number 1 on the main list. I made an entire video already about how much I love Dawn Trail, and in the year since then, it's only gotten even better. I have been kind of falling off 14 recently, but that's not Dawn Trail's fault. I've just pretty much done everything I wanted to. I will say that I've found Endwalker's post-game a lot more memorable than Dawn Trail's so far, but there's still time for it to pick up before the next expansion. Regardless, it's the best DLC of the year, and one of the best things I played in 2024 no matter what. Early Access. TCG Card Shop Simulator. Unlike the other game in this section, I'm not sure I'll ever go back to this. Not because it's bad, it's not. I enjoyed it a lot. But just because I feel like I got everything out of it I'd want to. It was fun, though it's also one of those games I got a bit too obsessed with. I was spending hours at a time just speeding through days and not particularly enjoying myself at the end, to the point where for the last few levels I ended up modding it just to make the XP rates faster. I think it's good and probably the only one of these shop simulator games you'll ever need to play, but I don't think it's good for me. Shapes 2. It's so good. It's just so good. I have to constantly stop myself from going back and playing it because otherwise I'll just get nothing done. The second this is out of early access, I'm going back to do the new Hexagon mode, or maybe I'll do that sooner and leave a hard mode playthrough till then instead. There's just a constant gnawing at the back of my mind that I could be making more factories to make more shapes, but instead I have to do things like go shopping or write videos or play other video games. I love the pure factory games like this, and despite being in early access, this is by far the greatest factory game I've ever played. Dishonourable Mentions. Mech Builder. I got a little too obsessed with building all the different models in this, but that's not really the game's fault. Some of the models are a bit more complex than I think the game can comfortably handle, but there's a ton of content and it's a great way to relax. It does, though, have an unclear number of AI-generated models contained within, and the developer has been incredibly weird about the disclosure, simultaneously excusing its use while pushing the blame off on nebulous members of the community. Because of that, Mech Builder is my only dishonourable mention, and for as much as I like it, I just wouldn't feel good recommending it. Honestly, if I'd known beforehand, I wouldn't have bought it in the first place. Mentions. Pepper Grinder. The placement for this was the easiest choice of the entire list. I'm actually surprised I even finished the game. If it had been any longer, I just wouldn't have bothered. If you really want to know what it's like, play the first world, then stop and turn it off. It never gets any better, and if anything, it just gets worse from that point. There's no new ideas, the levels don't get any more interesting, and the bosses suck even harder. I really try to be charitable with my opinions, acknowledging how other people can enjoy things that I don't, but I truly just don't understand why anyone would like this. Summer House. If you want something to mess around with for 10 minutes to make a diorama, you'll probably like this. There are some things you can do with it, combinations of items, unlock extra objects or interactions, but there's not really a game here per se. For me though, I want something else from my builders, and this just didn't satisfy me at all. Tiny Town. It's more of a puzzle strategy game than the city builder I wanted, and it's also incredibly easy to see all of the content in a short amount of time. It literally took me half an hour. You can keep playing for points if you want, but there's just not much else there for me. It's cute and charming and fun while it lasts, but after a couple of runs I have no desire to go back, and I honestly haven't thought about it since. Calorie Mate Liquid for game creators. This took everyone completely by surprise and was also surprisingly fun for an advert. That being said, it is literally just an advert for Calorie Mate, so I couldn't place it too high. It's also, despite its short length, one of the most infuriating games I've ever played, surpassed only by its sequel. Playing the game legitimately is a painful experience at times, so I'd highly recommend finding ways to skip its platforming as much as possible. At least though, this one doesn't have combat. Silent Hill: The Short Message. I'm kind of embarrassed to say this, but the short message is the first Silent Hill game I've finished. If you don't include PT, it's the first I've ever played too. It's also not great. I think if I cared about Silent Hill more, then I'd probably be harsher on this, but as it is, it's just fine. Not exactly scary, more just kind of irritating, but the story was more interesting than I think most gave it credit for, and especially for free, you can definitely do worse. Ad Fundum. This was the first game I finished in 2025. I finished it on the 8th of January. I still have the music stuck in my head. Not because it's good, it's just so wildly repetitive, being a constant loop of 20 notes for the entire game's length, it never stops. I think I'll still be hearing it on my deathbed. Anyway, the mining's fine, if it had been much longer I wouldn't have finished it. Super Mining Mechs. Despite its name, I don't think this game is very super. What it is an incredibly repetitive mining game. Holden, you say, aren't all mining games repetitive? And while that's true, they don't all make you play every world 4 times each, with their only variation being the depth you dig to. I think I prefer the first game, but this one definitely has more value for money. At least it's not a subpar mining mech. Pixel Cross Story of Seasons. I love Picross and I love the Harvest Moon Story of Seasons games, so you'd think I'd love this, but it's just surprisingly boring. There's such a ridiculous number of levels, and they're so similar to each other that you feel like you're just doing the same things over and over. And then there's the collage puzzles. While overall they make large images, individually they're just random squares, which means there's no pattern recognition or context clues to help you, making the puzzles incredibly frustrating. There's a lot of content, I'm just not sure it's worth doing it all. Gaudlets. This is actually a city builder unlike some of the others I've mentioned already, but it's very freeform and creative, and while that's cool, it's just not my vibe. The Gaudlets themselves are utterly adorable, as is the art overall, and it can be pretty relaxing to just build a little town however you want. I'd just rather have some proper objectives to work towards to keep me going. After doing whatever takes my fancy at the time, I just lose interest, and that's exactly what happened with this. Tavern Talk. Another entry into the hyper-specific genre of visual novels where you serve drinks, but it's by far the worst of the ones I've played. I really want to like it, but the writing's just kind of boring honestly, and it goes on much too long. I feel like there's simultaneously too much content for the time limit they set, while also completely dragging itself along on some days. With some more editing, this could be a better story, but even then, the drinks you serve would still be basically just the same for every day anyway. Another Crab's Treasure. My wife loves this game. Not playing it at all, just the crab. Which is kind of odd really, because she hates actual crabs. Remind her too much of spiders. Anyway, I'm kind of mixed on it overall. I really like the story and the characters and the art, but I'm just not really a fan of playing it. I think I'm just tired of Souls-likes honestly, and this ends up being a casualty of that. It's got a lot of stuff I enjoy, and I think it delivers its myriad messages well, but I was glad to be finished with it by the end. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Now I have no nostalgia for the original game, so I can't speak to that comparison, but I can say I didn't enjoy this as much as Remake. The story's great, the world is much more varied and interesting this time, and the combat's still a lot of fun, but if I never see another minigame it'll be too soon. They never stop. There's exactly one I enjoy, and that's Queen's Blood. If they released a standalone Queen's Blood game, I'd buy that right now. It'd probably have been higher on the list too. Turnip Boy Robs a Bank. It's rare that I finish a roguelike, so I must have enjoyed this, and I really did. While it's a huge departure from the first game, it's just as good in its own way. If I like it so much though, why the low placement? Well, when I first started playing it, there was a bug which meant that the game would delete your save file every time you turned it off. It's been fixed since, obviously, but that really tainted the entire experience for me. The rest of my time with the game was just spent worrying it'd happen again. The half-hour video is actually the run that got deleted, so at least there's some record of it. Anyway, there's a good chance that'll never affect you, and it's a lot of fun, if pretty short, so I can recommend it now. It's just a shame how it left me feeling. Croco Loco. I got this because I love Chillquarium and it's basically the same game but with frogs. It is, however, not quite as good. It's not an especially complex genre, but this felt more tedious and repetitive than the others I've played, and the addition of flies makes it less idle and encourages a much more active playstyle that I don't think really suits it. The random bonuses for your bred frogs can have a pretty big impact on your play too, and while the game isn't bad, it's definitely my least favourite in the genre, at least of the ones I felt were good enough to finish. Doodle Factory. Special thanks to Jean-Francis Bedin for providing the key to this game. My third favourite factory game of 2024. I feel kinda bad for it honestly, it's a good game with some odd choices that drag it down, but it's also competing with possibly the best factory game to ever release, so it was never going to measure up as well. The core shape and colour combinations work well and are decent, but having them stuck on different random boards that you can only have a maximum of 10 of, and also which you can only have a maximum of 4 active at any time, make what is otherwise a fun game into a kind of irritating mess of constantly flicking between your different boards to have the items you need available at any one time. I can see what it was going for, and there's definitely things I like, but it just doesn't quite reach its goals. Proverbs. Special thanks to Divide the Plunder for providing the key to this game. This was the last game I finished of 2024, and it was a great way to cap off the year. It plays kind of like a mix of Minesweeper and Picross, and for the most part that works great. Every now and then though, there's a section with not quite enough information, and there's just not much you can do about it. There are a few too many bits where I felt like I was guessing rather than working out what exactly the game wanted of me. The puzzle is also massive, which is pretty intimidating at first. Once I worked out my method of solving it though, I found it pretty relaxing, so if you're looking for a calming way to spend a few evenings, I can highly recommend this. Read-Only Memories Neurodiver. This took me completely by surprise, and not least because I didn't even know it existed. I can definitely see why people don't like this. It's not really a sequel to 2064 at all, and the characters from the first game that do appear don't really feel like the same people. But outside of that, I actually prefer it massively. I do wish it would have taken its story a bit further in some places, but it's still got some great moments, even if the premise is stronger than the execution. If the series were to continue as a sort of cyberpunk anthology, I'd be pretty interested in more of them, but if this is the only other we ever get, it's a bit of a weird follow-up, though one I enjoyed. Honourable Mentions. Helldivers 2. I haven't played this in over a year, but that initial month was a fantastic lesson in community building and management. While the game itself is fun, its multiplayer focus isn't really my thing, so I probably wouldn't have picked it up if that was all there was to it. Becoming part of the community though, working together towards a common goal, be that killing the bugs or annihilating the automatons, that's why Helldivers was such a memorable time for me. I'm not sure how well you could recapture that feeling, but there's still fun to be had with it outside of that even now. Awaria. Vanripper's follow-up to Helltaker, and while I still think it's great, I definitely think it's the weaker of the two. Outside of Helltaker's final level, I never felt cheated while playing that game, but Awaria has much more randomness to it, which leads to a much more frustrating experience. I could definitely see the genre change putting people off too, though if you give it a go, I'm sure you'll pick it up pretty quickly. The art is still an unreasonably high quality, the music slaps, and it's available completely free, so there's no reason not to get it. But if you end up enjoying it a bit less, then I can totally understand. Momodora Moonlit Farewell. I'll admit I only LP'd this because I mistakenly thought that I'd previously LP'd Reverie Under Moonlight. Not that I regret it at all, it's a great Metroidvania that I wanted to play anyway, but it probably wouldn't have been something I'd run out to get otherwise. I will say though that I think that final boss fight is one of the best things I've ever done in a recording, striking the perfect balance of difficulty and stress while also looking incredibly cool the entire time. It does feel a bit weird having played the start and end of a series but none of the games in between, but that's entirely my fault and something which I plan to rectify. Maybe sometime after I actually finally manage to beat Dora. Thank goodness you're here. As someone from the north of England, this is one of the most relatable games I've ever played. I still remember the first time I ever tried peens, or falling down the chimney into my neighbour's house, or getting my shopping at Price Shaggers, or the feeling of doing everything you can to satisfy everyone around you as they constantly demand more and more until you ultimately explode in a musical number. Just normal things for everyone from my area, to be honest. I am sad to say though that things have gotten a lot more expensive since this came out. You can't even get a chippy tea for 10 bob anymore. Little Kitty Big City. I think most people want to be a cat, be that secretly or openly, and if that's you, then you'll love this game. It captures the feeling of being a cat better than any other game I've played, and it's also just plain adorable the entire time too. It's not perfect, some of the platforming is a little awkward, and I ran into a couple of bugs during my time with it, but it's a perfect game to play over a long weekend. Even if you're one of those weird people who prefers dogs to cats, there's something here for you too. There's even a raccoon, there's something for everyone, but mostly cat lovers. Duck Detective: The Secret Salami. I wasn't expecting to play a noir detective about a bread-addicted duck in 2024, but I'm glad I did. The humour is on point throughout, and I think the dedicated quack button is my favourite button I've ever pressed. The puzzles aren't too complicated, though I'll admit one or two didn't quite click for me, but its minor shortcomings are easy to overlook. I would say I can't wait to see more from its characters, but I already did, and that one's great too. I do wonder though, in a world where all the animals are sentient, what exactly is the salami made from? Just a To the Moon series beach episode. What at first seems like a fun side story full of minigames and dumb jokes eventually reveals its emotionally devastating core and makes for yet another fantastic entry into the To the Moon series. By this point you probably already know if you'll like this game, it's largely the same as all the others in the series, but if you're interested, make sure to start with the first. This is very much not a series you can jump into, and this one especially has a lot of callbacks and references to the earlier games which will make it pretty much incomprehensible to anyone new to the games. To those of us that are familiar, however, it'll leave you a blubbering mess. Beltmatic. The third factory game I played from 2024, and actually one of the best. If you were going to ask me how to get into the genre, this is the game I would recommend first, even over either of the Shapes games. While eventually the puzzles become repetitive, pretty much all of them having the same general solution of using ordinances to get as close to your goal as you can in addition to make up that last little bit of difference, there's an inherent level of familiarity to maths that most people have that I think make this a much better way of introducing yourself to one of my favourite genres. While it's not perfect, it's a great entry point and one I implore you to give a chance. Stellar Blade. The first console game from Shift Up, and by far their biggest game, as well as one that's often unfairly derided as Gooner bait. While it's definitely got a bit of a, let's go with focus on its female characters, a lot of the more overt things are something you'd actively have to search out yourself anyway, and all of the outfits are entirely useless and optional. The game itself though, while not the deepest in either story or gameplay, has a lot of stuff to enjoy within. The music is particularly good, though considering their work on Nikke, that's to be expected, and I can't think of any other game that includes a side quest chain which ends with you catching a whale shark. It's a decent Souls-like, which gets pretty existential, and you should give it a go if that sounds even vaguely interesting, because I'm sure you'll love it by the end. Mouthwashing. This is a mature game I can definitely see people not enjoying, but it's also a completely unique experience that I think everyone should go through. It pulls off the psychological, bordering on cosmic horror better than many other horror titles, while also taking risks in its storytelling that could be divisive, all in an attempt to heighten its impact. It's an important reminder that games don't always have to be something you enjoy, that fun doesn't have to be the focus, that you can use the medium to tell a story in a way no other can. Number 10. Astrobot. This love letter to PlayStation's history builds off the earlier Playroom, which itself was one of the only reasons to get a PS5 on release. It's just that good. The sequel manages to be just as good, but for way longer, packing in over 100 unique bots, each with their own references to famous franchises. The nostalgia bait is strong, but it's also just a fantastic platformer outside of that, so whether you know who Polygon Man is or not, there's something here to enjoy. I don't like platformers, so they have to be exceptionally good to keep me playing. Luckily for everyone, Astro Bot is. It's also got some of the most rage-inducing levels I've ever played, and a large part of me regrets finishing them. I just wanted to see all of the cool bot variants, but a decent chunk of them were for characters I don't even particularly like or recognise. The folly of growing up with Nintendo over PlayStation, I guess. If you don't go for 100% completion though, and just go through all the main worlds, Astro Bot's a charming, adorable, and simply fun platformer that even I like. It's better than Mario Odyssey. Number 9. Tiny Terry's Turbo Trip. Possibly the weirdest game I played from 2024, though that's by no means a bad thing. After your parents head off on their summer holiday without you, obviously the best thing to do is to ditch school, become a taxi driver and drive to space. Not sure why I never thought of that, to be honest. Maybe that's my fault, I should just aim higher. You'll drive around the town of Spranklewater, helping its inhabitants with any jobs they require, stealing cars and trying to convince people they're on fire, all in an effort to collect enough junk to turn your car from a regular taxi into the spacefaring vehicle of your dreams. The game is genuinely hilarious at times, so long as you vibe with its off-kilter humour, and if you don't, that is 100% a failing on your part. There's also some surprisingly touching moments that I didn't expect going in, but they were welcome and managed to recontextualise the game from a fun and weird adventure into a story of a child just trying their best. You can ignore that though if it's not your thing. The endgame grind can get a little bit much, but you don't really need to do everything to beat the game. All you're required to do is get enough boosters to drive to space. You don't have to buy every hat along the way. That being said, who could resist? Number 8. Tales of Kenzera Zao. An exploration of grief in the form of a brilliant Metroidvania, and one which I really think deserves more attention. You'll play as the titular shaman Zao as they set out on a journey to bring back their deceased father. Joined by the god of death Kalunga, you try to fulfill your bargain, 3 great spirits in exchange for your baba's soul. To do this, you'll need to make use of the ranged powers of the moon along with the melee-focused sun to defeat anything in your path and bring peace to both the land and yourself. I remember this getting announced at the Game Awards in 2023 and then never hearing about it again. When it first popped up in a Humble Monthly, I legitimately thought about not redeeming it because it was an EA key instead of Steam, but that would have been a huge mistake. It immediately just feels good to control, good enough that I decided almost immediately I had to finish it. It's not perfect, there's a decent number of bugs, a couple of incredibly infuriating platforming sections, and colour-coded enemies are never particularly fun. But for the most part, this is a great Metroidvania, and especially so considering it was the first project from a new studio. It honestly makes me kind of sad how this game has passed so many people by, because I think it's a fantastic addition to the genre, and if given the chance, I'm sure you'd grow to sing its praises too. Number 7. The Plucky Squire. Before release, I thought this looked amazing. The leap from 2D to 3D was something I hadn't really seen before, and the Zelda-esque stylings looked right up my alley. When it actually came out though, I mostly heard a lot of complaining. That it was too linear or too handholdy, and that, combined with its higher than expected cost and just my lack of free time on release, meant that I let it pass me by. It wasn't until I got it in a Humble Monthly this year that I gave it a go and learned just how wrong I'd been. It's just utterly adorable. Everything about it is wildly charming, there's no wasted effort in getting you to fall in love with its world. Even the bits that I could maybe find kinda cringe, the mojams being the main offender, end up at worst being just ignorable. The rest of the game though is honestly near perfect for me. Its story delivers a number of beats that I really didn't expect from what is largely a pretty child-friendly game. The gameplay, while never exactly challenging, is consistently fun throughout, though I'll admit I kind of struggled with the timings on the boss fight minigames, and it wraps up in a way that I'd be glad to see another game from what could easily be a series. Honestly, the only reason this isn't higher is because there were a few softlocks I ran into, which, while not costing me a huge amount of time, were definitely a little frustrating. Number 6. The Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom. I've already put out a full video review on Echoes of Wisdom, so I won't be going into huge detail here, but what I will say is this is one of my favourite Zelda games in years. My distaste for the Wild Era games is well documented by now, and while this still has a pretty drastic twist on the traditional Zelda style, it's a damn sight closer to what I actually love from what was for a long time my favourite series. I still think it's kind of disjointed, where either Zelda should have just been given a sword and used the rod as a tool, or removed the ability to use a sword at all instead of hedging in with this temporary usage. It just feels like they weren't totally comfortable with going all in on the new summoning style, but the mix makes the game worse overall. That being said, I just had a better time with this than any new Zelda game in years. The remakes of Skyward Sword and Link's Awakening were tiding me over while we got through the new Wild stylings, but I was honestly losing hope we'd ever see another Zelda game I liked. When this was first announced, I actually had even less hope, but once I started playing it, I turned around pretty fast. While its unique summoning gameplay isn't exactly to my taste, it's functional enough, even if the menu is utterly awful to navigate, and the rest of the game surrounding it, the story, structure, dungeons, music, characters, everything else about it, is exactly what made me fall in love with the series in the first place. Number 5. Metaphor ReFantazio. After the king's death throws Uchronia into crisis, and with their only heir gradually dying to a curse, Will is sent to discover a cure that will rouse the prince from his eternal slumber. You quickly learn that the king's assassin and the man who cast the prince's curse are one and the same, Luis Gearburn, the man who seems most likely to be next in line to be king. Clearly then, the best course of action is to declare yourself part of the tournament for the throne, kill Luis, and install the prince back to the throne. You'll travel across the land, which, while united under the king, is still clearly divided by its ancient tribalism. Make friends, fight foes, solve problems, and do everything you can to kill Luis before they win the tournament. This is the first Atlas RPG I ever managed to finish, and it might end up being the one that really gets me into them. I have played a few beforehand, but never made it to the end of any of them. I find the calendar format of the Persona games incredibly stressful, and the difficulty of the Shin Megami Tensei series is just too high for me to enjoy. Metaphor, however, strikes a perfect balance where I never felt too pressed on what to do each day, while also keeping me on my toes but not punishing me too harshly. Despite taking me well over 100 hours, I never felt like the game lost pace, and the story left me itching for more every time I turned it off. I do love JRPGs, but for the most part any game that takes me more than 40 hours is usually one I don't finish, but this was well worth the time. Number 4. Mini-shoot adventures. Casting you as the last free member of an adorable race of sentient spaceships, Minishoot tasks you with rescuing the rest of your village from the corrupted crystals of the Unchosen. You'll gain powers to open up new areas, race sprites, buy upgrades, and level up with the ability to respec your build on the fly. Its unique blend of Metroidvania and twin-stick bullet hell doesn't sound like it would mesh, but it manages to combine both parts into a near-flawless package, with the leveling up and exploration I love, and its fast-paced tight controls forming an undeniably addictive mix. This wasn't on my radar at all, but after I saw someone else playing it, I knew I'd have to try it out. Once I actually got my hands on it, I fell in love with it immediately. I actually had plans to do an entirely different LP, but I just couldn't resist playing through this instead, and while I was a little worried it'd get too hard for me, it ended up being practically perfect throughout. It's not placed as highly as it could have been, purely because I really don't like that the ending of the game wipes your save. While I understand thematically, it left a bad taste in my mouth, which was a real shame after what was otherwise a spectacular 10-hour journey. I think that's honestly my only complaint, and while it's clearly a big one, the rest of the game is so good that I couldn't stop myself recommending it if I tried. Number 3. Dungeons of Hinterberg. This captures the feeling of going on holiday surprisingly well, though I'll admit that none of my holidays involve slaying magical beings. Waking up each day, deciding what you feel like doing, and then going out, reading a book in a forest, skiing down the slopes, or slaying monsters in a dungeon. It's a perfect way to relax from the day-to-day grind. Maybe you can make some friends along the way, or learn more about the culture, tear down a corrupt government, maybe become the living embodiment of magic. Anything is possible in Hinterberg. I've said it a few times in this video, but it seems I enjoy games more when they take me by surprise, and Dungeons of Hinterberg exemplifies that better than most. I'd barely even heard about it before I got it in a Humble Bundle, but it quickly became something I couldn't stop thinking about. The Persona-style relationships, along with its Zelda-esque dungeons and combat, just hit perfectly for me, and while the combat isn't exactly the deepest thing there is, there was enough there that I didn't get bored. I have some minor complaints, but they honestly just don't matter. In fact, my biggest complaint is that I don't think enough people are talking about it. You should go buy it so you can fall in love with it too. Number 2. Tactical Breach Wizards. The most important thing to Jen, Private Investigator and Storm Witch, is getting paid for her last job. That might be a little awkward though, considering she's been arrested after stumbling into a murder scene, and now a group of armed mercenaries has broken in and kidnapped the only lead she had. Now she's going to have to go on the run in a cross-continental chase alongside her former partner Zan Veska, to rescue a murderer, get paid, and maybe prevent a war, and definitely to push Steve out of a window. Lots of other people too, but especially Steve. I was interested in Tactical Breach Wizards mostly because I liked the prior Suspicious Development titles, particularly Gunpoint. It is, however, a turn-based tactics game, a genre I'm famously terrible at, so I wasn't sure I'd actually like it. I was lucky enough that one of my friends bought it for me as a gift after I mentioned it, just because they'd already beaten it and thought it was great, and I'm happy to say they were totally right. Allowing you to preview your turns before you make them makes the entire game into a massive puzzle, which put me much more at ease, to the point where I actually went out of my way to do everything in every level, even the optional ones. Except for the endless levels, they're just not my thing. The gameplay is great and the plot kept my attention, but I was definitely there mostly for the characters and their interactions. Making every character interesting in both personality and mechanics is not something many teams can pull off, and where usually I'll tend to stick to the starting cast with most party-based games, each time a new character was introduced here, I wanted nothing more than to try them out as soon as I could. They all have their own uses, but shine brighter when combined with each other, and there's no weak link in the entire cast. A lot of the games from this year were great, and especially my top 5, I could have seen an argument for any of them being Game of the Year. While this didn't quite make it, that's not at all due to a lack of quality. It excels in every aspect, from its music, art, characters, story, gameplay. Everything is to such a ridiculously high standard that there's barely anything separating this from my number 1. I can practically guarantee that if you play this, you won't be disappointed. My Game of the Year for 2024... SteamWorld Heist 2. Picking up a few decades after the destruction of the Vectron hive mind at the end of Heist, 2 places us in the shoes of pirate captain Quincy Leeway, the lackluster son of the legendary Kraken Bane. After rescuing your crew and submarine from the clutches of the Royal Navy, you'll head out on the high seas to try to search for a source of clean water, and maybe along the way you'll do some heroic deeds of your own. What starts as a grounded search for water eventually becomes a fight to defeat a world-ending beast, and you'll need the help of all of your crewmates to save the shard. I should mention that Thunderful have given me multiple games previously, including SteamWorld Build, but they didn't give me this. Speaking of, actually, it's kind of crazy that we got Build, a game I like but was ultimately disappointed by, and then a year later, Heist 2 ends up being my Game of the Year. I wouldn't have expected such a jump in quality between games, though I obviously understand they weren't made by the same team. In some respect, it's even less expected considering the original Heist is either 3rd or 4th on my personal tier list of SteamWorld games, at least prior to this one. I drastically prefer the Dig games and Hand of Gilgamesh, and depending on the day, I'd even prefer Build. Strategy games just aren't usually my thing, and while I still think it's good, Heist was actually the only game in the series that I dropped, at least until I ultimately came back to it just before Build came out. I had pretty low expectations for 2. I was always going to get it, I just love the series, but considering I didn't love Heist and how much I'd been disappointed by Build, my hopes weren't exactly high. 2 though is a huge improvement over the first in almost every way. The addition of an overworld between levels helps to break up the tension of the combat, while simultaneously making the world feel much more cohesive than the first game. I do think sometimes the overworld can be a bit too big, and some of the overworld combat can get pretty hectic, but for the most part I enjoyed its inclusion. To help you get around the overworld, you'll have to make use of the various upgrades and customizations for your submarine, some that make you do more damage, while others provide more defense, though by far the most useful are the ones that make it just that bit faster to get around what eventually becomes a pretty large map. Speaking of customization, there's also lots of ways to customize each character too, though in some ways I feel like that kind of forces you into making quite similar builds for each character, just because some upgrades, particularly the movement ones, are just strictly better than others. The characters do still manage to stand out in their own way though. Besides the flexible builds, each have their own individual strengths and personality. Possibly it's just because they're the starting crew, but my favourite party was Quincy, Daisy and Wesley, and then if we get a fourth, it'd be the Crowbar or Poe. Crowbar's extra jump height can really help flank some of the enemies, where Poe's extra movement can be built to get even stronger, eventually resulting in a character that can cover almost the entire map each turn. Wesley I built mostly for grenades, and combined with the ability to take an extra turn with each kill, he can make for a great room clearer. Daisy is a great sniper, and with the right build she can deal huge amounts of damage from multiple rooms away, keeping both herself and other crewmates safe from a distance, while her stun makes her useful even in tight quarters. And Quincy, well, he's Quincy. It's not to say any of the other characters are bad, I used all of them in my time, but these are the ones I'd gravitate to the most. It helps as well that the game is gorgeous to look at and sounds fantastic too. It's by far the best looking and sounding SteamWorld game. While each of them have their own style and quirks, I think this is the strongest in both regards. The music really fits the ocean-faring theme perfectly, and I look forward to each new port to see Steam Power Giraffe play their songs. Each of the zones also manage to have their own aesthetic which feel unique, while also still feeling like they're part of a cohesive world. The story feels a lot smaller scale at first. You're no longer traversing all of space, you're just on a single shard in a single ocean, but not only do the game's stakes end up being similarly high, the smaller scale actually becomes part of the story. Learning that helping people locally can be just as important as helping them universally, and in some ways even more important. Quincy ends up being quite relatable. I often feel like a failure, like I'm not living up to the potential others expect of me, but this journey goes to show that doing your best for everyone is the only standard you should hold yourself to, and somewhere along the way, maybe you'll end up saving the world too. Despite my initial reservations, I ended up falling in love with SteamWorld Heist 2, to the point where immediately upon finishing it I decided it was my game of the year. That very rarely happens. I like to give myself more breathing room between finishing a game and ranking it, but for this it was undeniable. While I wouldn't advise it, you definitely could just jump in here, but I think if you find this interesting at all, you'd probably love the entire SteamWorld franchise. Now we just have to wait for them to finally re-release SteamWorld Tower Defense. Trimming this down was definitely a good idea, but even then it's still taken a lot of work to get it done. Honestly, what happened was, as I was writing the script, Humble released the Wholesome Snack Bundle, and 7 of the games in that I wanted were from 2024. There just wouldn't have been enough time for me to play those and include them in the list, and it just kind of forced my hand. Instead of every game I played then, I just got it to all of the games I've finished, which is still almost double the number I covered last year. Writing, recording and editing a 13,000 word script in 3 weeks would have been much too much for me, and definitely so when I could have been doing this for basically the last 2 years instead. Maybe I'll learn a lesson from this and start my next one earlier, but I'll guess you'll have to wait until December 2026 for that. I'll see you then, and thanks for watching.
Special thanks to my patrons, Justin Wood, Hobbs and Koopy Vegeta. You can join my patrons at patreon.com/Holden Gatsby, check out my TikTok and Twitter at Holden Gatsby, and follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/Holden Gatsby. Don't forget to subscribe to all of my channels. If you want more, you can watch my last video now, but if not, then thanks for sticking around. Bye.